The Varaxian fleet dropped out of hyperspace near the moon. 800 warships, each one larger than anything humans had ever built, arranged themselves in perfect formation. Their dark hulls blocked out the stars as they turned toward the blue planet. Below, Ambassador Kethanar stood on the bridge of his flagship. The Dominion's Edge, he was tall even for his species, with forearms and skin that shifted between gray and black depending on his mood. Right now, it was a confident gray. He had done this 43 times before on 43 different worlds. The process was always the same. Send the message. Wait for panic. Accept surrender. Begin occupation. Open a channel to the planet, Kethanar ordered. His mandibles clicked together as he spoke, a sound that his translators converted into something the primitive species below could. Understand the message was simple and direct. Surrender your world unconditionally. Lay down all weapons. Prepare for integration into the Varaxian Empire. Resistance would result in the complete destruction of all major population centers. They had 24 hours to respond. Kethanar watched the message transmit and then settled into his command chair. He expected the usual response. Confusion at first, then fear, then desperate attempts at negotiation. Finally, when they realized that negotiation was not possible, they would fight among themselves until a faction emerged, willing to accept Varaxian terms. He had seen it happen on every world. No species could unite quickly enough to mount a real defense. Their own divisions always destroyed them before his weapons needed to fire. On Earth, the message arrived at 17 different monitoring stations simultaneously. Within minutes, it had been verified, translated, and forwarded to every government on the planet. Admiral Lisa Monroe received the call at her home in San Diego. She had been sleeping, something she did rarely these days. At 62 years old, she had spent her entire adult life in the Navy. She had seen combat in 3 different conflicts and had buried more friends than she could count. When her aide, Lieutenant Kevin Park, told her what was happening, she did not panic. She did not even seem surprised. "Get me transport to Pacific Fleet Command," she said calmly, "and start waking everyone up. This is going to be a long night." Across the world, similar scenes played out. Military commanders were pulled from their beds. Politicians were rushed to secure locations. Emergency protocols that had existed only on paper for decades were suddenly activated. President Daniel Hayes arrived at the White House Situation Room within an hour of the transmission. He was a former Marine, a man who had served 2 tours in combat zones before entering politics. He read the Varaxian demands twice, then set the paper down on the table. "How long do we have?" he asked. "They gave us 24 hours, his national security advisor replied. "But we have no way of knowing if they will honor that." Hayes nodded slowly. "Get me connected to every major world leader. I want a global conference call within the hour." The call happened in 47 minutes. Presidents, prime ministers, chancellors, and dictators all appeared on screens around the Situation Room. Old enemies sat next to old allies. Countries that had been threatening each other with war just days ago now faced a common threat that made their conflicts seem meaningless. Hayes spoke first. "You have all seen the message. You all know what we are facing. I am not going to waste time with speeches. We have one question to answer. Do we fight or do we surrender?" The room was silent for a long moment. Then the Russian president spoke. "If we surrender, what happens to our people?" "We do not know," Hayes admitted. "But based on what little we can guess from their message, integration does not sound pleasant." "Then we fight," said the Chinese premier. "We fight together or we die separately." One by one, every leader on the call agreed. There were no lengthy debates, no arguments about territory or resources or old grudges. In the face of extinction, humanity found something it had never found before: complete unity. Within 6 hours, a global command structure had been established. Military forces from every nation were placed under a unified command. Resources were pooled. Intelligence was shared. Secrets that had been guarded for decades were suddenly revealed to former enemies. Admiral Monroe was placed in command of Pacific operations. She stood in her command center watching data flow in from around the world. Ships were moving. Aircraft were being armed. Soldiers were taking positions. "This is unprecedented," Kevin Park said quietly, standing beside her. "I never thought I would see anything like this." "Neither did they," Monroe replied, nodding toward the screen showing the Varaxian fleet. "That is our advantage. They expect us to be divided. They expect us to be weak. They have no idea what they are dealing with." Aboard the Dominion's edge, Kethenor received his first reports from the planet's surface and felt a strange sensation he did not immediately recognize. It took him a moment to identify it as confusion. "This data cannot be correct," he said to his tactical officer, a younger Varaxian named Vex. "It shows unified military movements across the entire planet." Vex checked the data again. "The readings are accurate, High Commander. Every nation-state on the planet appears to be coordinating their defense. It's possible. We have observed this species for 17 cycles. They are constantly at war with each other. They cannot even agree on basic governance systems. How could they possibly unite in less than a single rotation?" Vex did not have an answer. He simply stared at the data, watching as military assets moved into position with an efficiency that should not have been possible. Kethenor stood and walked to the viewing port. The blue planet hung in the darkness, looking peaceful and small. But the data told a different story. It told of a species that was not reacting the way it should. "Pull up their historical records," Kethenor ordered. "Everything we have collected from their broadcast signals. I want to know what we are dealing with." What followed was several hours of the most disturbing research Kethenor had ever conducted. He watched recordings of human wars, conflicts that stretched back thousands of years. He saw weapons of increasing sophistication, from simple blades to nuclear explosions. He saw a species that had been fighting itself with such dedication that it had developed the art of war into something almost sacred. "They have never known peace," Vex said quietly. "Not real peace. Not for their entire history." "No," Kethenor agreed. "They have been preparing for war since before they had the words to describe it." He looked at the planet again, and for the first time in his long career, he felt something new. It was not fear, exactly. It was more like the first hint of doubt. "They united in less than 6 hours," he said. "No other species has ever done that. Most take weeks to even acknowledge the threat." "Perhaps we should reconsider our approach," Dex suggested carefully. "Perhaps we should attempt negotiation." Kethenor shook his head. "The High Council expects conquest, not negotiation. We will proceed as planned. These humans may have surprised us with their unity, but they are still primitive. They have no experience fighting a war beyond their own atmosphere. They will break, just like all the others." But as he gave the order to prepare the fleet for assault, Kethenor could not shake the feeling that he was making a terrible mistake. Below, on Earth, Admiral Monroe received word that the Unified Defense Plan was ready. She looked at the countdown timer showing how much time remained before the Varaxian deadline expired. "They think they are hunting prey," she said to no one in particular. "They have no idea that they just knocked on the door of the most dangerous house in the galaxy." Picked up the phone and spoke to words that would change the course of human history. "Begin preparations." The Varaxian fleet began its descent toward Earth exactly 24 hours after the ultimatum was delivered. Kethenor had received no formal surrender, which did not surprise him. Lesser species often needed to see destruction before they accepted their fate. He ordered the first wave forward. 100 ships broke formation and dove toward the planet's atmosphere. Their mission was simple: destroy 3 major cities as a demonstration of power. The humans would see their homes burn and finally understand that resistance was futile. The ships entered the upper atmosphere without incident. Sensors showed no significant military response. A few primitive aircraft had launched from ground bases, but they were too slow, too far away to matter. Everything was proceeding exactly as expected. Then the sky fell on them, Commander. Samuel Griffin stood in the command center beneath Cheyenne Mountain. watching the Varaxian descent on a massive display screen. He was a calm man by nature, trained to keep his emotions in check during crisis situations. But even he felt his heart rate increase as he watched the alien ships approach. "Orbital defense platforms are locked on target," reported Captain Maria Santos from her station. "Kinetic rounds are ready," Griffin nodded. These platforms had been placed in orbit over the past 15 years, officially designated as satellite maintenance stations. In reality, there were weapons platforms carrying thousands of tungsten rods, each one weighing several tons. They had no explosives, no guidance systems after launch. They were simply heavy objects that could be dropped from space at incredible speeds. The physics was simple. An object falling from orbit accumulated enormous kinetic energy. When it hit something, that energy was released all at once. No shields, no armor could stop the simple, brutal force of mass traveling at 17 kilometers per second, Fire Griffin said. The tungsten rods fell like rain from heaven. Aboard the lead Varaxian assault ship, Commander Veth had exactly 3 seconds between the first sensor warning and total destruction. His shields, designed to deflect energy weapons and guided missiles, did nothing against solid metal moving faster than any weapon his species had ever encountered. The rod punched through his ship from top to bottom, and the resulting release of kinetic energy turned the vessel into an expanding cloud of debris. 43 ships died in the first 15 seconds. The Varaxian formation, so precise and orderly moments before, dissolved into chaos as captains tried to evade attacks. They did not understand. Kethanar watched from the Dominion's edge with something close to horror. "What weapon is this?" he demanded. "Our shields should have stopped any projectile." Dex studied the sensor data frantically. "They are not projectiles in the traditional sense, High Commander. They are simply dropping heavy objects on us. There is no energy signature to deflect, no guidance system to jam. Just mass and velocity." Another wave of impacts. 18 more ships vanished from the tactical display. "All ships increase altitude," Kethanar ordered. "Get above their range." But the humans were not finished with their first surprise. Admiral Monroe watched the Varaxian retreat from Pacific Fleet Command. The kinetic strikes had worked even better than projected, but she knew they were just the opening move. "Launch the interceptors," she ordered, from bases hidden across the globe. Aircraft that officially did not exist screamed into the sky. The X-47 Phoenix program had consumed billions of dollars over 15 years of secret development. They were unmanned, hypersonic, and capable of operating at the edge of space. Each one was controlled by a pilot sitting in a bunker thousands of miles away. Their reactions enhanced by neural interface technology that allowed them to fly as if the aircraft were extensions of their own bodies. Lieutenant Danny Cruz sat in his control pod beneath Edwards Air Force Base. His consciousness merged with his aircraft through a direct neural link. He could feel the wind resistance on the wings, sensed the heat building on the leading edges as he pushed toward Mach 7. 300 other pilots were doing the same thing at bases around the world. All Phoenix units. "Engage at will," came the order. The Varaxians had regrouped at high altitude, thinking they were safe from the primitive, ground-based weapons. They were wrong. The Phoenix fighters rose from below like angry wasps. They moved in ways that should have been impossible, pulling turns that would have killed any human pilot if they had been aboard. The AI systems coordinating their movements operated at speeds the Varaxian tactical computers could not match. Danny targeted a Varaxian destroyer and fired. His missiles were not designed to destroy the ship outright. They were designed to damage, to wound, to force the enemy into defensive positions. The real killing would come from elsewhere. "They are pushing us again," Dex reported, his voice strained. "The small craft are hurting us toward the ocean." Kethanar did not understand why that mattered until he saw what rose from the water. Missile submarines had been positioned across the Atlantic and Pacific for months, part of the regular patrol rotations that every major naval power maintained. When the order came, 47 submarines surfaced simultaneously and opened their launch tubes. Over 2,000 missiles erupted from the oceans. These were not nuclear weapons, which the Varaxians had detected and dismissed as a minor threat. These were conventional warheads, modified with targeting systems that linked directly to the same satellite network controlling the orbital platforms. The missiles rose in coordinated waves, their flight paths constantly adjusted by the orbital targeting systems. Every time a Varaxian ship moved, the missiles adjusted. Every time they tried to use countermeasures, the missiles compensated. Commander Samuel Griffin watched the engagement unfold on his displays. The Varaxian fleet, which had looked so impressive just hours ago, was being torn apart by weapons they had never anticipated. Moment 5, he announced to his command staff. We have confirmed kills on over 150 enemy vessels. Casualty rate is holding at 0 for our forces. Admiral Monroe allowed herself a small smile. This is just the beginning. Let them know we are just getting started. Aboard the Dominion's Edge, Kethanar faced a situation he had never experienced before. His fleet had lost nearly 200 ships in less than an hour. His assault waves had been destroyed before they could fire a single shot at the planet's surface, and the humans had not even used their most dangerous weapons yet. High Commander, we are receiving reports from across the fleet, Dex said. Multiple captains are requesting permission to retreat. Denied, Kethanar replied automatically. We have 800 ships. Even with these losses, we have overwhelming force. We have 600 ships, High Commander, and the number continues to fall. Kethanar stared at his tactical officer. In all his years of conquest, he had never lost a third of his fleet in a single engagement. He had never lost a third of his fleet in an entire campaign. What are they? He whispered. What kind of species fights like this? Vex pulled up more data from the planet's surface. Military bases were fully activated. Civilian populations were being evacuated to shelters with remarkable efficiency. There was no panic, no chaos. The humans were moving with a precision that suggested they had been preparing for this moment their entire lives. They had been waiting for us, Vex said quietly. Perhaps not for us specifically, but for something like us. Every weapon we have encountered was designed for exactly this scenario. Kethanar understood then that he had made a terrible mistake. He had come to Earth expecting to find a primitive species divided by petty conflicts. Instead, he had found a civilization that had spent its entire existence learning how to fight, how to kill, how to survive against impossible odds, and now that civilization had finally found an enemy worthy of its full attention. Regroup the fleet, Kethanar ordered, his voice hollow. All ships to defensive formation. We need to reassess our strategy. Below, on Earth, Admiral Monroe received reports of the Varaxian regrouping. She looked at the tactical display showing the remains of the alien fleet and nodded slowly. They are starting to understand, she said. Good, but we are not done teaching them yet. She turned to her communications officer. Signal all commands. Prepare for Phase 2. The battle was far from over, and humanity still had many more lessons to deliver. The Varaxian fleet hung in high orbit, licking its wounds. Kethanar had lost nearly 300 ships in the first engagement, and his remaining commanders were openly questioning whether to continue the assault. In the history of Varaxian conquest, no fleet had ever suffered such losses against a single planet, but Kethanar was not ready to retreat. Retreat meant disgrace. Retreat meant facing the High Council with nothing to show for the campaign except dead ships and failed promises. He needed a victory, even a small one, to salvage his honor. We will land ground forces, he announced to his command staff. The humans have shown strength in space combat, but they cannot have the same capabilities on the surface. We will establish a foothold and demonstrate that resistance is ultimately futile. Vex wanted to object, but he knew better than to challenge the High Commander in front of the other officers. Instead, he simply noted the locations where human defensive coverage appeared weakest. These coastal regions show reduced military presence, Vex reported. The humans appear to have concentrated their forces around inland population centers. Kethanar studied the data and saw what he wanted to see. Opportunity. He did not consider that the humans might have left those areas undefended for a reason. Prepare 30,000 troops for planetary insertion, he ordered. We land at these coordinates. On Earth, Admiral Monroe received intelligence reports of Varaxian troop transports preparing for launch. She smiled and picked up the secure line to General Charles Bennett at the Pentagon. "They took the bait," she said. "Standing," Bennett replied. "All ground forces are in position. We are ready to welcome our guests." The Varaxian landing craft descended through the atmosphere in tight formation. They were heavily armored, designed to survive anti-aircraft fire and deliver troops into hostile environments. The soldiers inside were confident. They had conquered dozens of worlds and had never faced an enemy they could not defeat on the ground. The landing zones had been chosen. Carefully beaches along the eastern coast of the United States, coastal areas in Western Europe, and several points along the Pacific Rim. The transports touched down smoothly, ramps dropped, and thousands of Varaxian soldiers marched onto Earth's soil for the first time. What they found confused them. There was no immediate resistance. No soldiers rushing to meet them. No vehicles, no fortifications, no obvious military presence at all. Just empty beaches and quiet forests. Field Commander Drex led the largest force. 12,000 troops landing near Charleston, South Carolina. He scanned the area with his sensor equipment and detected no enemy forces within several kilometers. "Establish a defensive perimeter," he ordered. "Begin construction of forward operating base." Soldiers moved efficiently, setting up shield generators and communications equipment. Everything was proceeding according to standard protocol. 3 kilometers away, Captain Henry Walsh watched the alien activity through a pair of old-fashioned binoculars. He commanded a Marine battalion that had been in position for 6 hours. Hidden in the forest surrounding the landing zone, his soldiers were using equipment that would have seemed outdated even by Earth standards. Chemical propellant rifles instead of energy weapons. Vehicles with combustion engines instead of the quiet electric motors used by most modern militaries. Explosive charges that used physical detonators instead of electronic triggers. All of this was intentional. The Varaxian sensors were designed to detect energy signatures, electronic emissions, and advanced technology. They were not designed to detect soldiers using equipment that would not have seemed out of place in a war fought a century ago. "Hold position," Walsh said quietly into his radio. "Let them get comfortable." The Varaxians spent 2 hours establishing their base. They brought in heavy equipment, set up command posts, and prepared for a prolonged ground campaign. They felt secure behind their shield generators, confident that their technology would protect them from any attack. Then the shooting started. Private first. Class Angela Torres was 19 years old. She had joined the Marines right out of high school and had spent the past year training for combat she never expected to see. When her squad leader gave the signal to fire, she did not hesitate. Her rifle was a simple weapon, steel and wood and chemical propellant. The round it fired was just a piece of shaped metal, but that piece of metal traveled faster than sound. And when it struck the Varaxian soldier in her sights, it punched through his armor like it was not even there. The Varaxian shields were designed to stop energy weapons. They were designed to deflect guided missiles and block laser fire. They were not designed to stop small pieces of metal flying at 800 meters per second across the entire landing zone. Human soldiers opened fire simultaneously. The effect was devastating. Varaxian troops, standing in the open because they believed their shields made them invulnerable, fell by the hundreds in the first 30 seconds. Field Commander Drex screamed orders into his communications unit, trying to organize a response. But his soldiers had never faced this kind of attack. They were trained to fight enemies with advanced technology, enemies who fought from a distance with precision weapons. They had no experience with enemies who hid in forests and shot at them. With chemical projectiles, the humans were everywhere and nowhere. They fired from concealed positions, moved before the Varaxians could return fire, and appeared again from a different direction. It was chaos, pure and absolute. Captain Walsh moved with his troops, directing the engagement with the calm efficiency of a man who had trained for this moment his entire career. "Keep them off balance," he ordered. "Do not let them regroup." Similar scenes played out at every landing zone. In France, a combined force of French and German soldiers ambushed a Varaxian battalion as it moved inland from the coast. In Japan, self-defense forces used the mountainous terrain to devastating effect, hitting the aliens from above and vanishing before they could respond. In Australia, soldiers who had spent years training in the outback showed the Varaxians what it meant to fight on their ground. The Varaxians had expected to face organized military formations. Instead, they faced a species that had perfected the art of irregular warfare over thousands of years of constant conflict. Corporal Stephen Blake found himself face to face with a Varaxian soldier during the chaos of the Charleston battle. The alien was larger than him, stronger than him, and carried weapons far more advanced than his rifle. But the Varaxian hesitated. It had never fought an enemy at close range. It did not know how to react to a threat that was not on its sensor display. Blake did not hesitate. He had been training for close combat since boot camp. He fired 3 rounds into the alien's chest, watched it fall, and moved on to the next target without breaking stride. "They do not know how to fight," Blake reported to his sergeant between engagements. "They have all this technology, but they do not know what to do when it does not work." "That is because they have never fought us," the sergeant replied. "Keep moving. We are not done yet." Aboard the Dominion's Edge, Kethanar watched the ground battle unfold with growing despair. His tactical displays showed his forces being destroyed piecemeal across 12 different landing zones. 30,000 troops, the finest soldiers in the Varaxian military, were being slaughtered by an enemy using weapons his sensors could barely detect. "This is impossible," he said. "They are using primitive projectile weapons. How can they be so effective?" Vex had no answer. The data made no sense. The humans should have been overwhelmed by superior Varaxian technology. Instead, that technology was proving useless against an enemy that fought in ways the Varaxians had never anticipated. "Hi, Commander. We are receiving requests for evacuation from all ground commanders," Vex reported. "Casualty rates are approaching 40% across all landing zones." 40%. In less than 4 hours, Kethanar had never heard of such losses in ground combat. On most worlds, the mere presence of Varaxian troops was enough to crush resistance. On Earth, his soldiers were dying faster than he could count them. "Order evacuation," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Recover whoever is still alive. We are pulling back." On the ground, Captain Walsh watched as the surviving Varaxians began retreating toward their landing craft. His soldiers kept up the pressure, harassing the aliens every step of the way. "Do not let them leave Islay," he ordered. "Make sure they remember this day." By the time the last Varaxian transport lifted off from Charleston, 7,000 alien soldiers lay dead on the beach. Human casualties for the entire engagement numbered less than 200. Admiral Monroe received the final reports and allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The ground battle had been a complete success, but she knew the Varaxians still had ships in orbit, still had weapons that could devastate the planet if they chose to use them. The battle was not over. It was time for the next phase. "Signal all commands," she ordered. "Prepare to take the fight to them." The Varaxian fleet was in chaos. Nearly half of the original 800 ships had been destroyed or disabled. Ground forces had been devastated, with fewer than 8,000 survivors returning from the planet's surface. And still the humans showed no signs of surrender. Kethanar stood alone in his command chamber, staring at the tactical display. The blue planet turned slowly below him, looking peaceful and innocent, but he knew now what lurked beneath that calm surface. He had awakened something terrible, something that refused to follow the rules of conquest he had always known. "Hi, Commander," Vex said quietly from the doorway. "The fleet commanders are requesting a council of war." "What is there to discuss?" Kethanar replied without turning. "We have 2 options. Retreat in disgrace, or continue fighting and watch our fleet be destroyed. There may be a third option. Some commanders are suggesting we use planetary bombardment, destroy their major cities from orbit, force them to surrender through pure devastation." Kethanar considered this. It was against Varaxian doctrine, which preferred to capture worlds intact for easier occupation. But nothing about this campaign had followed doctrine. Perhaps extreme measures were required. Begin targeting calculations, he ordered. We will see if the humans are truly willing to let their civilization burn rather than surrender. On Earth, Dr. Patricia Coleman had been monitoring Varaxian communications from her station at the Pentagon. The alien encryption was sophisticated, but not sophisticated enough to defeat the combined efforts of every intelligence agency on the planet working together. They are planning orbital bombardment, she reported to General Bennett. Multiple cities targeted. They are preparing to fire within the hour. Bennett's face remained calm, but his eyes hardened. Then we do not have time to wait. Execute Phase 2. Phase 2 had been developed for exactly this scenario, an enemy attempting to destroy population centers from orbit. It required coordination between systems that had never operated together before, using technology that had been hidden even from most government officials. All stations. This is Pentagon Command, Bennett announced over the secure global network. Execute Bright Shield. Repeat, execute Bright Shield. The EMP satellites activated simultaneously. These were not the crude electromagnetic pulses generated by nuclear explosions. These were precision instruments, designed to find specific communication frequencies and overload them with targeted bursts of energy. In seconds, every Varaxian ship in orbit lost contact with every other Varaxian ship. Their advanced communication systems, which had allowed them to coordinate across thousands of kilometers of space, went silent. Kethaner felt the impact immediately. One moment he was receiving reports from across the fleet. The next moment he was alone, isolated on his flagship with no way to contact his captains or coordinate the bombardment. He demanded, "Unknown, High Commander. All communication frequencies are being jammed. We cannot reach any other vessel. Switch to backup frequencies. They are jammed as well. The humans appear to be targeting every frequency we use simultaneously." The Varaxians had never faced an enemy capable of this level of electronic warfare. Their communication systems were considered unhackable, their frequencies undetectable. They had not considered that a species might simply overwhelm them through brute force, jamming everything at once. While the Varaxian fleet struggled to restore communications, the humans launched the next phase of their attack. Ground-based laser systems activated across 6 continents. These installations had been built under the cover of atmospheric research stations and space debris tracking facilities. Their true purpose had been classified at the highest levels of every government involved. The lasers were not powerful enough to destroy Varaxian ships outright, but they did not need to be. Their purpose was to blind, to confuse, to damage sensitive equipment, and disrupt targeting systems. Beams of concentrated light stabbed upward from Earth's surface, striking Varaxian vessels that had believed themselves safely out of range. Sensor arrays were burned out. Navigation systems were scrambled. Ships that had been preparing for bombardment suddenly found themselves unable to see their targets. "We are under attack from the surface," Vex reported, his voice rising with something that sounded like fear. Multiple ships reporting damage to external systems. Kethanar watched helplessly as his fleet fell into greater chaos. Without communications, each captain was making independent decisions. Some tried to move higher, out of range of the ground-based weapons. Others attempted to descend and attack the laser installations. The result was confusion. As ships maneuvered without coordination and occasionally collided with each other, Admiral Monroe observed the chaos. From her command center, and felt something she had not allowed herself to feel until now. Hope. The Varaxian fleet was breaking apart before her eyes. Its technological superiority rendered meaningless by weapons and tactics they had never anticipated. "All naval forces, this is Pacific Command," she announced. "Begin final offensive operations." The aircraft carriers had repositioned during the initial phases of the battle, spreading out across the Pacific and Atlantic to maximize their coverage. Now they launched everything they had. Lieutenant Commander Jason Mitchell flew an F-35 off the deck of the carrier Intrepid. His aircraft was loaded with Air-2 space missiles, weapons that had been developed in secret and never tested in actual combat until today. He joined a formation that included aircraft from 6 different nations: American, British, French, Japanese, Australian, and Korean pilots flying together in perfect coordination. Their targeting systems were linked through the same satellite network that had guided the initial kinetic strikes. All aircraft, engage at will, came the order. The Varaxian ships, still struggling to restore communications and repair damaged sensors, barely registered the incoming threat. Human aircraft rose from below, fired their weapons, and dove away before Varaxian gunners could track them. Mitchell targeted a Varaxian cruiser that was attempting to descend through the chaos. His missiles struck it amidships, and he watched with grim satisfaction as the alien vessel began to list and fall.
Splash one,
he reported. Good kill, Viper lead. Continue pursuit. Across the planet, similar engagements were taking place. The humans had seized the initiative and were not letting go. Every Varaxian attempt to regroup was met with another wave of attacks. Every effort to restore communications was countered by new jamming frequencies. Sergeant Nicole Campbell led a special operations team that had been inserted behind enemy lines during the initial ground battle. Her mission was simple: destroy Varaxian landing craft before they could evacuate survivors. She and her team moved through the French countryside, using skills that had been developed over decades of special operations training. They found their targets parked in a field, guarded by a handful of confused Varaxian soldiers who had no idea the enemy was already among them. Take them out, Campbell ordered. Her team struck with silent efficiency. Within minutes, 3 landing craft were burning, and the surviving Varaxians were either dead or fleeing into the Enza. Countryside Campbell reported the successful mission and moved to her next objective. There was no time to rest. Every destroyed landing craft meant fewer Varaxians escaping and more pressure on the fleet above. Aboard the Dominion's Edge, Kethanar made a decision he had never imagined making. He had entered Earth's orbit with 800 ships and the confidence of 43 successful conquests behind him. Now, with fewer than 400 vessels remaining and no way to coordinate his forces, he saw only one path forward: all ships, emergency retreat. He ordered through what limited communications had been restored. We are withdrawing from this system. Vex looked at him with something like relief. High Commander, the fleet will need time to regroup for hyperspace jump, and we buy time. All ships, maximum acceleration away from the planet. We get clear of their weapons range, and then we jump. The surviving Varaxian vessels began to flee. But even retreat was not going to be easy. Admiral Monroe watched the Varaxian withdrawal on her tactical display. They are running, she observed. But we are not finished with them yet. She turned to her communications officer. Signal the President. Tell him it is time for the final lesson. The battle had lasted hours. But the most important moment was still to come. The Varaxian fleet fled toward the edge of the solar system at maximum speed. Behind them, Earth grew smaller with every passing moment, but Kethanar could not stop looking at it. That small blue world had done what no other planet in the history of Varaxian conquest had ever done. It had broken him. His fleet of 800 ships had been reduced to fewer than 200 effective combat vessels. 30,000 ground troops had become fewer than 8,000 traumatized survivors. And all of it had happened in less than a single planetary rotation. How far to minimum safe jump distance? He asked quietly. Approximately 6 hours at current speed, Dex replied. We should be beyond the range of their weapons within 2 hours. Kethanar nodded slowly. 2 hours. He just needed to survive 2 more hours, and then he could escape this nightmare. He would face the High Council, accept whatever punishment they deemed appropriate, and spend the rest of his life warning others about the danger that lurked on that small blue world. He did not know that the humans had one more lesson to teach. On Earth, President Daniel Hayes stood in the White House Situation Room. Surrounded by military commanders and advisors, Dr. Patricia Coleman had just finished explaining Project Longbow, a weapons system that had been developed 3 years earlier and rejected as too extreme for any realistic scenario. The Varaxians are fleeing, General Bennett explained, but they will return, or they will tell others about us, and those others will come. We need to send a message that will be heard across THE galaxy. Hayes looked at the tactical display showing the retreating Varaxian fleet. He was a Marine. He understood the value of decisive action, of ensuring that a defeated enemy stayed defeated. What are the capabilities of this system? He asked. Dr. Coleman stepped forward. Project Longbow uses railguns positioned around the planet to launch guided projectiles at extremely high velocities. The projectiles can accelerate continuously using small onboard engines and can adjust their trajectory throughout their flight. Effective range is approximately 5 million kilometers. And you believe these projectiles can catch the Varaxian fleet? Yes, sir. Their ships are damaged, their sensors are compromised, and they are focused on escape. They will not detect the projectiles until it is too late. Hayes was silent for a long moment. He thought about the cities that had been threatened with orbital bombardment, the soldiers who had died defending the landing zones, the fear that had gripped the world when those alien ships first appeared. Do it. He said the railguns were positioned at 12 locations around the planet, disguised as part of the global defense network. When the activation order came, they pivoted toward the sky and began firing. The projectiles were small, each one about the size of a human fist, but they were dense, made of materials that could withstand the incredible forces of acceleration. And they were smart, equipped with guidance systems that could track a target across millions of kilometers of empty space. The first volley consisted of 1,000 projectiles. They left Earth's atmosphere at speeds that made the earlier kinetic strikes look slow by comparison. And they continued accelerating once they reached the vacuum of space, aboard the Dominion's edge. The first warning came 3 hours after the retreat began. A sensor officer reported small objects approaching from the planet's direction. Identify them, Kethanar ordered. Unknown, High Commander. They are too small for accurate analysis at this range. Possibly debris from destroyed vessels. Kethanar almost dismissed the report. Almost. But something made him pause. Some instinct that had been sharpened by the disasters of the past several hours. Track them, he said. Let me know if they change course. 20 minutes later, the sensor officer reported again, and this time his voice was filled with fear. High Commander, the objects are not debris. They are adjusting their trajectories. They are following us. Kethanar felt his secondary heart skip several beats. That is impossible. We are millions of kilometers from the planet. No weapon system has that kind of range. They are still accelerating, High Commander. At current velocities, they will intercept us in approximately 2 hours. The Varaxians tried to evade. They changed course, accelerated, decelerated, did everything their damaged ships could manage. But the projectiles adjusted with them, our guidance systems constantly recalculating to maintain. Intercept trajectories. The first impact destroyed a transport ship carrying survivors from the ground battle. One moment the vessel was there, the next it was an expanding cloud of debris. There was no warning, no chance to evade. The projectile simply appeared and struck, transferring all of its kinetic energy into the target. Then the second impact came. And the third, and the fourth. Kethanar watched his fleet die around him. Ships he had commanded for decades. Officers he had served with for centuries. All of them vanishing one by one as the human projectiles found their marks. Can we do nothing? He demanded. Our point defense systems are too damaged to track objects that small and fast, Dex replied, his voice hollow. We cannot evade them. We cannot destroy them. We can only watch them come. Over the next several hours, as the Varaxian fleet continued its desperate flight toward jump distance, the projectiles continued to arrive. They came in waves, each wave smaller than the last, as the humans expended their ammunition. But each wave still deadly, by the time the Dominion's edge finally reached minimum safe distance for hyperspace travel. The fleet of 800 ships had been reduced to 83 functional vessels. Everything else was debris, scattered across millions of kilometers of space. Kethanar sat in his damaged command chair and composed the message he would deliver to the High Council. He knew it would end his career, possibly his life, but he also knew it was the most important message he had ever sent. Earth is not to be approached, he dictated. The species known as humans are not to be contacted. They are not primitives. They are not prey. They are apex predators, and we have made the mistake of letting them know they are not alone in the universe. He paused, remembering the last human transmission his damaged receivers had detected. It had been an image of a human soldier standing atop a destroyed Varaxian war machine, next to text that his translation systems rendered as, "Welcome to Earth. May the galaxy forgive us for what we have awakened," Kethanar concluded. The surviving Varaxian ships engaged their hyperspace drives and fled into the darkness between stars. They would carry the story of their defeat to every corner of the Varaxian Empire. And from there it would spread to every species that had ever feared Varaxian conquest. Earth had done more than defend itself. It had sent a message that would echo across the galaxy for generations. 6 months later, Admiral Lisa Monroe stood before the newly formed United Earth Defense Council. The chamber was filled with representatives from every nation on the planet, all of them united by an experience that had changed the course of human history. "We won this battle," Monroe said, her voice carrying across the silent room. "But we would be foolish to think it was the last. The Varaxians will tell others about us. Some will avoid Earth out of fear. Others will see us as a challenge to be overcome." She activated a display showing the solar system. New defense installations were visible throughout the system. Orbital platforms, lunar bases, weapon stations positioned at strategic points. The work of 6 months, accomplished through unprecedented global cooperation. The battle ended in just 15 moments, Monroe continued. 15 turning points where human ingenuity and courage overcame an enemy that had conquered 43 worlds. But the war for our future has just begun. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of leaders who had once been rivals and enemies, now united by a common purpose. Whatever comes next, whatever species decides to test humanity, they will find us ready. We are no longer a divided world arguing over borders and resources. We are a species that has looked into the darkness between the stars and refused to be afraid. The chamber erupted in applause. Above Earth, the first true warships of the human fleet began their patrols. Vessels designed not just for defense, but for projection of power across the stars. Humanity had learned it was not alone in the universe, and the universe was about to learn that this was not necessarily good news. In the darkness beyond the solar system, the story of Earth's victory spread from ship to ship, world to world. Some heard it and felt fear. Others heard it and felt respect. And a few, a very few, heard it and felt something they had not felt in a very long time. Hope. Because if one small world could stand against the Varaxian Empire and win, then perhaps the age of conquest was finally coming to an end. Perhaps the galaxy was about to change in ways no one could predict. On Earth, children looked up at the stars and dreamed not of fear, but of possibility. They had grown up in a world that had faced its greatest challenge and emerged stronger than before. They were the first generation of humans who knew, with absolute certainty, that they were not alone in the universe, and they were ready for whatever came next.